New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here. I'm so very glad that you have joined us for this episode of The Inclusive Church. Every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, we come together and recommit to being leaders in spiritual communities where oneness does not require sameness. And in the Inclusive Church, we realize that the church is not about the property or the building. It is about the people who come together to explore spiritual concepts and to teach and to practice and to support one another. And that, in effect, the community, the communion of people exploring this common idea and these common principles is what really is what a church is about. And in New Thought spiritual communities or churches that are committed to being inclusive, there are specific things that you want to think about, talk about, practice, learn. And that's what the show is about every Tuesday. During the month of September, however, I'm really focusing on what we can learn and live inspired by the book, Finding Refuge. Hard work for healing collective grief. And so if you are understanding that the grief that we feel as individuals who may be members of groups who have not been treated fairly, or the collective grief of all of the population of dealing with the impact of discrimination or oppression or being disregarded, that we can do that together. And in fact, we must do it together if we want to have an environment that is truly inclusive and not based on or not replicating what is happening in the macrocosm in the world at large within our own spiritual community. So every week this month, as we're talking about the different chapters, I have one or two guests with me, and so that you get more than one perspective. And so today I'm really excited to welcome Reverend Rafe Ellis, and we're going to be talking about chapter 1, the root, and chapter 2, a little of this practice. Now, if in case you didn't hear the introduction to the book, excuse me, got a little something going on. It There is a full recording about the introduction and about some of the shared language or definitions of terms that are used in the book. And so you might want to go back and pull up that video. But it is in the introduction, subtitled Turning Toward My Own Grief. The author, Michelle Cassandra Johnson, really goes into what happened within her personal experience that awakened this conscious awareness of the impact that grief can have on a member of an identity group that has been marginalized, or an identity group that has been the target of bad behavior, and how important that would be to heal. And if you're part of a group that everybody, not maybe everybody, but almost everybody, has some experience like that. And in order to build bridges across cultural norms, it's really important to be intentional about that grieving and bringing spiritual practice into that process as well. So I'm going to welcome Rafe Ellis in. Come on in, Rafe Ellis. I'm so happy that we get to hang out together today. Who are you?
That's a loaded question. So do you want just the overarching intro? Because that question actually ties into my experience of the book right out of the gate.
The 2-minute version. Who are you? The 2-minute version unmuted of who you are.
So I am Reverend Rafe Ellis, Senior Minister and Spiritual Leader of the newly joined spiritual communities of Greater Baltimore and Columbia within Centers for Spiritual Living. We are two communities that have come together to form something new that we are in the process of learning what we are now, who we are now, because I've been very clear that for us at Columbia to say Greater Baltimore is joining us would be the activity of assimilation, not inclusion. And so for real inclusion to happen, we have to allow for a synthesis to happen, a convergence, if you will. So now we're something totally new, and we're figuring out what that is. So yeah, that's what I do for a living, and there's lots more that I'll share once we get into the book.
Thank you. And you are one of the people I thought of the first time I read this book, in terms of like who's living some of what the author talks about. And we're going to focus on chapters 1 and 2. And chapter 1 is titled The Root, and chapter 2 is titled A Little of This Practice. And one of the things I do like about this book is that Michelle Cassandra Johnson has a quotation at the beginning of each chapter. So at the beginning of chapter 1, The Root, the quotation reads as follows: "Roots are not in a landscape or a country or a people. They're usually inside yourself." Roots are not in a landscape or a country or a people. They're usually inside yourself. And the quote that begins chapter 2, which you'll hear again, but I'm guessing that we might be going not just in linear order. So with chapter 2, the opening quote is, the spirit is beyond destruction. No one can bring an end to spirit which is everlasting. And that's from the Bhagavad Gita. And so in these two chapters, just from those quotes, if you haven't read the book, just from those two quotes, you are immediately getting a sense of the going within, going back, but really going within, and the never-ending nature of spirit, which is what we teach in New Thought. And how does that weave into, oh, heart work for healing grief. So, Rafe, on chapter 1, especially, or 2, but what really stood out for you when you read the chapter 1 or chapters 1 and 2?
So, what really struck me is how well she writes, because at least I could, and let me own that part of it is because of identification with a lot of what she's saying. I could feel, right? Oftentimes reading, I get it here, but I don't get it here. And the way she offers the material, I got it here first, and then I got it here, which was just a wonderful experience. A couple of passages that really stood out for me in chapter 1. The first was, let me pull up my notes here. When one loses connection with oneself, it is difficult to see the humanity in others. It is a challenge to digest and process the grief that arises from being severed from our collective innate divinity, humanity, and wholeness. It becomes impossible to interpret patterns of violence, loss, dominance, and harm, behaviors that led to my mother being uncared for. And so in context, the reference to her mother, she's telling her experience of watching her mother in her elder process be ignored, which sadly is more common than any of us want to admit, and certainly more than many of us want it to even exist, where people with black and brown skin are systemically dismissed in having any wisdom about what's going on in their own bodies. I have not experienced that as a person of color, because it's pretty clear I'm not. And so there's no way I could experience that as a person of color. I have watched my wife experience it, and I am walking through the medical ramifications in her body of her being ignored when things could have been prevented had she been listened to 15 years ago. So I know the context is real. The whole part about when we're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from humanity, speaks to the core of what I believe and what life is. You know, this whole teaching of one wholeness demands that I stop separating myself, and that I be willing to be curious about how some other iteration of this one magnificent whatever it is experiencing life in this physical realm. Not from the perspective of their experience, but owning it at the level of my experience too. And I think ultimately, this first chapter about the root is what she's offering us. That, we've been treating the symptoms. We've been treating the symptoms, but we keep refusing to diagnose, to identify the root. And until we do, healing is not even possible.
When I was reading this chapter, every time I've read this chapter, which is maybe about 5 times now, even though I knew what was in the chapter after the first time, I was as angry every subsequent time reading or rereading her description of what happened and the kind of treatment that her mother received and the assumptions. And so the quote that I highlighted was at the bottom of page 25, where she writes, "I couldn't help." She had interrupted a pattern that would have seen her mother be released for the wrong thing and not be able to really recover. And so she writes, "I couldn't help but see the parallel between my mother's illness and the sickness that dominant culture perpetuates. My mother had an infection in her spine, at the root of her spine. My mother's vertebrae were not only inflamed and infected, but there was also minimal cartilage between them. Her spine was compressed, making it more difficult for her to stand or sit upright and tall. While my mother and I were challenged by dominant culture through the system of healthcare at every turn, I kept considering the infection dominant culture has at the root, never allowing us to physically or psychically stand upright and tall in our humanity." So often when we talk about isms or when we talk about oppression, we talk about it or think about it as one mean person doing something, or one person doing something that has a negative impact, even though they didn't intend for it to hurt people. But we don't think about it as, wait a minute, there's an infection at the root of the very beingness of our culture that allows for racism, that allows for homophobia, that allows for people from different age groups to disrespect one another. That it's almost invisible, but it's there and it's at the root. And then we start working on the symptoms. Like, we pick one symptom. Oh, George Floyd was killed. Or in the context of the book, Trayvon Martin was killed and George Zimmerman was acquitted. Well, it's a horrible thing, and it's just a symptom. Are we willing to go to the root and see how to heal that?
Yeah, and oftentimes I go to the online etymology dictionary to remind myself of what words actually mean, because we can put 100 people in a room and ask them what a word means, and we'll get 100 different definitions, right? Root in its origin means underground, downward growing part of the plant. And what that reminds me is, first of all, a root is not a static part of the plant. It is continuously downward growing. It is the thing that grows deeper and deeper and deeper underground to sustain what is above ground. And so, in order to heal, we have to go under the surface. We have to get to, and digging it up doesn't necessarily work, because the thing about roots, if you do anything with plants, there's the big roots, and then there are these little things called root hairs that sometimes you don't even see, and you think you've gotten the weed up by the root, and then there it is again. Because what's under the surface continues to give life to what's above the surface. For me, that section of where she lays out the terms, and this will surprise no one who knows me, the intersectionality term really empowered me to do this practice in a different way. And I learned something I was unaware. I knew about Kimberly Crenshaw, but I did not know that the term intersectionality was first spoken by Sojourner Truth. It still gives me goosebumps just to even say that. It's not new. There really is nothing new under the sun. And when I start owning, one of the things that I did in the practice that she offers in the second chapter is to commit myself to looking at my intersectionality and journaling about that every day. And because it's way deeper than even I on the surface get. I mean, just what came out of the first journaling. I'm a white-skinned, able-bodied person with multiple hidden physical disabilities that don't render me not able-bodied. Middle class, but I was raised lower class in abject poverty as a child in a broken home. Female to male transgender person, identifying as heterosexual male now, but for 43 years I identified as a homosexual lesbian. Of mixed ethnicity, Cherokee, Scotch-Irish, German, and English, which is also referred to as Anglo-Saxon. I'm a person with lived experience of 16 years of active addiction, 42 years of recovery. I have a wonderfully checkered past with past criminal behavior, and I was a deputy. I'm a person with lived experience of mental, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. I have experienced oppression as a lesbian, as a fat person, as a female, as one in poverty, as being illiterate until I was 15, of being the only white family in literally the black ghetto. And I have privilege. Privilege as in unearned, right? White skin is a privilege. My male identity now is a privilege. My education level is privilege. The fact that I have the title of minister in front of my name gives me privilege. Doesn't matter if I want it or not. Right? And it is absolutely unearned. As a woman, one day I'm like steeped in misogyny. And literally 90 days later on testosterone, when things started to change, my whole experience and how I'm treated changed. And when I steep myself in those intersectionalities, not from identifying myself out of humanity, but identifying myself in to humanity, then I'm drawn to a deeper understanding, not of the intellectual nonsense that we spew as the symptom of the root of grief, but actually understanding the root of grief as that sense of loss, a sense of harm, and to fully understand that grief, by definition, is relational. I can't grieve without some relationship, whether it's to a pet, to an object, to a person, to an ideology. Something, I have to be in relationship with something in order to grieve it, in order for it to be removed or taken away or injured. And if I will stay in that place of relationship, then I can understand even those who oppress me. I'll stop there.
And that says a lot, and it means a lot. I think that many people fail to recognize this whole piece that you so beautifully demonstrated just in your own life around intersectionality, that you, in your own life experience, are not monocultural. And you have lived experience in the ways that so many different cultural or identity groups show up and or received by others. And I believe that's true for all of us at some level. Like, right, maybe someone can only think of 4 or 5 ways that they experience intersectionality, maybe by age group and gender and religion, or maybe 3 or 4 different. But most of us have many different ways, not as many as you, because you got a lot. But that in itself can open us up to the reality that if that's true for me, it's true for everyone. And so I'm not going to pigeonhole someone into one thing that I see. Like, oh, Tracy's Black, so now I know everything about her and the way that she experiences the world. The other piece that really stands out for me from what you said is how important it is for us to recognize, like, that we have to do something. We have to do something, starting with looking beneath the surface. We have to be willing to look beneath the surface, and then we must be willing to, it's not enough to just dig up the root. Like, we have to create a new root condition, right? We have to, it's not so much attack, because I'm not in my language, at least, trying to, like, we're not just fighting. And maybe that's part of it, that we don't heal things because we think we just have to fight whatever it is. We have to fight the racism, but then what are we going to fight for, right? Let's not just fight against something. Let's plant some new root, that the acorn must grow into an oak tree. So what is it that we're planting as the new root, which of course she actually does get to later in the book, but just in talking about the root itself. Now I'm going to quote one other thing, and then maybe we talk about the practice, or maybe we move to chapter 2, because otherwise we'll spend the full time just on chapter 1. Right before the spiritual practice, and FYI, if you haven't read the book, or if you're not reading the book yet, in every chapter, Michelle Cassandra Johnson also offers a detailed spiritual practice that we can use to help heal this grief, individually and or collectively. But right before the spiritual practice in chapter 1, she writes this paragraph. If we desire wholeness and dominant culture striving to continually fragment us, we must deepen our connection with our hearts. If we desire to heal ourselves and create conditions for others to heal, we must grieve our heartache. We must remember that we are whole, even when our hearts are broken. A deeper connection with the heart, both what causes it to feel pain and grieve, as well as what causes it to find ease and heal. All of it is necessary at this time. I'm going to add at this time in the world we live in the 21st century, if we want it to be different, if we want it to be different, then we've got to heal the grief and reveal something different.
And I had that quote pulled out. And the part about the practice, and I'll just, the bottom line practice, how you get there, it's all breath work. But I feel my heart. I acknowledge my heart. I feel my heart break. I acknowledge my heartbreak. And I think it's right in the preceding paragraph, I don't remember exactly where it is, she says, your heart may be holding something related to your marginalized identities and dominant cultures' attempts to deny you the right to liberation. Or because dominant culture encourages you to look away from the suffering of others, and even, perhaps, to look away from your own complicity in that suffering. And that little blip right there, I think, sums the whole thing up that we're struggling with. Because, it's interesting, the title is Finding Refuge. And if you go to the etymology of refuge, its companion word is fugitive, which surprised me, right? Refuge is finding that safe place for the fugitive that is running away. And when I read that, and I get emotional even saying it, because all of us, every single one of us, is a fugitive of oppression, is a fugitive of racism, somehow, some way, is a fugitive of homophobia and transphobia, because we're fugitives of separation. We've been taught that separation is supremacy, that it is the top of the heap, and really, it's the dung that the roots are growing in.
So I too have never connected refuge and fugitive. So it's going to take all the discipline I can use to not just let you talk for the next 15 minutes while I just think about the connection between finding refuge and being a fugitive. That's going to be, I'll be journaling about that and reflecting on that, because that's deep. And then what that last part that you were saying, I agree 100% that dominant culture has rewarded us for not looking beneath the surface. Dominant culture has rewarded us individually and collectively for supporting a hierarchical supremacy based on factors that have nothing to do with skill, competence, or any of those things that would truly be merit based or unleash the total power of the universe. So I love it that in chapter 1, she really took us deep with the root and encouraged us to look at our own roots as well as in that context of society as a whole. And then she walks us right into chapter 2, a little of this practice. And again, the quote is, "The spirit is beyond destruction. No one can bring him into spirit, which is everlasting." And in her earlier book, Skill in Action, a lot of what she dealt with, or a lot of what she shared, came from the not just the physical practice of yoga, but the philosophical underpinning, the spiritualities, so to speak, of yoga practice, and how we then can take those skills and those principles and put them into action in the world, especially to counter dominance, to counter supremacy, to counter oppression. And so she, I think, builds on that from the stories that she shares in this chapter. Any highlights for you from chapter 2?
The quote that I pulled out of chapter 2 that, I mean, I could completely identify with her story of being pulled over while black, from experiencing that on the phone with my wife, who was pulled over a mile from our house, 5 deputies to pull over a 60-plus-year-old brown woman in a brand new car simply for going the wrong way on a one-way street that the sign was changed the night before. Now, I know as a deputy, just like she said, I know you ran my plates. I know this is a rental car, right, in the chapter. And she's absolutely correct. No law enforcement officer pulls over anybody without running the plates first. That is just standard protocol for safety, period. And to be on the phone and hear the terror that is, I mean, and, my wife had done nothing that she needed to be terrified about. That is ancestral terror. It is racial terror. It is put upon her by hundreds of years of society doing that. And that the quote, collective grief is what is experienced by communities when their sense of safety is challenged or stripped away. There is no denying that we are in a collective grief from many things. I mean, if we think about all of the systems that we live in that challenge or strip away any group's sense of safety, that pretty much encompasses our society, with a few 1% exceptions. And yes, I went there because it's accurate. And if we take that to the individual level, because I read that several times just for myself, collective grief is what I experience by communities, about communities, when their sense of safety is challenged or stripped away. To own that all the privilege I have doesn't give me the privilege to ignore that. That is not a privilege, that is a choice, and it is a choice to challenge and strip away more safety.
And so often, I was reminded as I was rereading this that so often what happens is it's easier to pretend, it's easier to convince ourselves it's happening to someone over there and it has nothing to do with me. It's easy in our society to convince ourselves of that. But for those of us who do this spiritual work that we talk about and the principles we say we believe, we can't say in 1 week there's only one thing happening here, or there's only one person here because of, right, we've all been created by the same source and we are all connected, which I love how she gets into with beehives later in the book, talking about the culture of a hive. But we can't say it like on, one week that we're all connected and there's nothing that can separate any one of us individually from the source of all life that has created us and from each other. But then when we read a story in the news, or we get something that is sent, a meme in our social media that is telling us about something that has happened to people who are in an identity group that's different from my own, we don't get to say, oh, poor them. Oh, poor them. Oh, that's really horrible. Oh, well, I'm just not going to watch the news and hear more about that because, I'm over here and I'm safe and protected from it. It's like, no, we either believe what we teach or we don't. And if I believe what I teach, then I love the way you framed it when we talk about privilege as unearned benefits. Then I may have the privilege to have unearned benefits and not directly experience something that someone in another group is experiencing. But that privilege does not give me permission to pretend it's not happening or to refuse to even speak to it, let alone take action to interrupt it or to end it.
In fact, privilege calls me to act more responsibly because I have the privilege to be heard in ways that, and it's an interesting thing for me as a transgender man, because whether I want it or not, because I'm married to a woman, I have white, male, heterosexual, cisgender privilege, even though I'm not all that. Some of those things I am, but some of them I'm not. But I have that privilege. The doorway is there. And so I get to choose whether or not to use that to be a part of the healing process or to advocate that responsibility. And I will say this, because it popped up while you were sharing. The whole thing about not watching the news, ignorance is not a refuge. It is being a fugitive.
Nice. So you also used the word that was like responsibility. There is an African principle that is Fahodie, and the symbol, the Adinkra symbol that represents Fahodie, is um, is striking, but the meaning of the philosophy is with freedom comes responsibility. And this individual and collective responsibility, if I am a group that is experiencing unearned benefits based on my group identity, there is a responsibility to, at least in African culture, and I would like to see it be experienced and demonstrated more in 21st century American, US American culture, that, oh, let me use my privilege to speak up. Let me use my privilege to include others as a demonstration that they are as valued as I am. Let me use my quote unquote privilege, or the fact that people will listen to me or will hear what I'm saying, even though I'm saying the same thing that other person said. And I will give them credit for it, because the more I model that, the more I am contributing, one, to changing the root, to replacing the root with healthy behaviors. And also, I'm demonstrating, not because I want credit to be called an ally. No, it's because I am responsible for contributing to create the kind of world I want to live in, where everyone is respected and valued for their contribution. And that's a whole different thing. It's not my ego wanting to be recognized. It is my deepest intention demanding me to do something that might be even uncomfortable, to demonstrate the kind of world I know it represents the original intention of creation.
And I want to live these practices that she's offering in a way that allyship becomes a word in the dictionary of history that we no longer use, because we no longer need allies. See, for me to be a good ally, I still need people to be marginalized. Right? I don't want to be an ally anymore. I want to eliminate the need for allyship.
We could do a whole show just on that topic, because when I get talking about, I don't use the word in my presence, do not use ally in my presence. Do not come to me and tell me you are an ally for Black people. Do not. Number one. But you're right. That could be an entire show all by itself. So I'm not going to get distracted there, because we're winding down to about our last 5 minutes. And luckily, there are only a couple more pages in chapter 2. I loved this practice. I loved the spiritual practice, well, in almost every chapter, but for chapter 2. If you have not read the book yet, let me tell you a little bit about the practice that she shares. It's sadhana. And for this practice, you will need your journal and a pen or pencil. You will cultivate a practice you can engage in for 40 days in spiritual spaces. Often this is called a sadhana, which means dedicated practice. So she uses that introduction to then give us a task that starts with breathing so that you can quiet your mind. And then it's, through words, she guides you. There's some guided meditation, some guided breathing practice. And then she does some options. She gives you some options, some meditation options, yoga, mudra, or yoga body movement type of practice. And then it's the journaling prompts. And in the journaling prompts for this particular chapter, they are a reminder that, again, you're determining what you're going to do for 40 days, but what specific practice have you chosen? What resources might you need to support you in fully engaging in this? What will you remind yourself of if you begin to feel unmotivated to practice? And what gentle statement can you say to yourself if you skip a day of this practice? And then at the end of the journaling, you write, I commit to practice, fill in the blank, for 40 days, and then repeat it out loud. Now, I love this practice, not because it's not rocket science. I think I love it because it's so simple and because it brought me back to my personal responsibility. Right. So when George Floyd was, I don't know why I'm going back to George Floyd 2 or 3 times today. No, I'm thinking, is it near an anniversary? But no, that was in May. So anyway, it brings me back to this whole thing of, oh, what am I going to commit to practice for 40 days? And when George Floyd was murdered, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people were, oh my goodness, my heart is broken. Oh my goodness, my heart is broken. Yeah, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to get in there and do some work to interrupt police brutality for Black men? Are you going to get involved in some way to encourage and to support fair trials? Are you going to, what are you going to do? And part of the reason I believe, I'm just now realizing I believe this, part of the reason that I believe that we don't change things more rapidly is because we have not trained ourselves to have discipline to do what we commit to do that we say is important in our lives or in the lives of the collective. We don't have the discipline to sit every day for 40 days, even when it's hard. And I think that's why in this read, this time, that the spiritual practice for for the chapter 2, really struck me because I guess I should just say, I guess I should say I need a little more discipline in my life, and to commit to do this one thing for 40 days is going to support me in sticking to it in this hard work for healing collective grief.
And the simplicity of the practice is somewhat deceptive. right? I mean, it's simple, but that does not mean it's easy. For me, in the context of the collective grief, what I pretty quickly identified is that, I'm really good at doing that practice about myself when I'm angry, when I'm hurt. My deepest wound is still that place of invisibility and erasure as a transgender person. And so what kept coming up for me is to do that practice, to be disciplined, not around my own invisibility and sense of erasure, but to do that practice around the sense of invisibility and erasure at the level of humanity collectively. Oh my goodness, the things that are surfacing.
Well, I think we are going to move to close this conversation there, because there is a part of my brain that wants to go in this direction, and that would be another 15 or 20 minutes that we don't have. So I want to first and foremost thank you, Reverend Rafe Ellis, for joining me. And I want to encourage everyone that these conversations over the next few weeks through the month of September are just giving you just a little taste of what this book is about, and maybe how you might be able to use it and apply it in your life, and definitely in your spiritual community. Obviously, today we've been talking about chapters 1 and 2, the root, and a little of this practice and how we can apply it. And then next week, we'll be talking about chapters 3 and 4, wholeness, chapter 3, and enlarged hearts, chapter 4. So I hope that you will join me and my guests throughout the month, or if you are listening or watching this recording and it's past September, I hope that you'll go back and pull up some of the other weeks. And I hope that you will order the book as well. And I think it will serve you well if you want to deal with the grief of societal structure that is impacting individuals in your community, and bring spiritual practice to it in order to heal the grief and reveal the truth. Thank you so much, Reverend Rafe. We'll be talking again soon, okay? Everybody else, I'll see you again next Tuesday right here on the New Thought Media Network at noon Mountain Time. My name is Tracy Brown. You can check me out throughout the week at stainedglassspirit.net.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network. Come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.